So let's get started. Happy Thursday to everybody. Again, the title, Revolutionizing Business, the Rise of Generative AI. So congrats to the marketing team. I think a great headline. But what we really want to do today is really jump into how you can take generative AI in your engineering operations. So we're going to talk about a couple of different areas, obviously software development, maintenance, testing, and operations. We think there are really some interesting applications there. I'm Ken Gravanovic, COO of Blameless, and I'm joined by Jim Goshi, the CEO. A little bit about myself, and then Jim, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself. You know, I've been in the software business a long time, from founder of web.com to working at Cox driving transformation when we, would have, hundreds of billions of dollars going through different platforms, to working with you at New Relic, to Uncork. So been doing it a long time, lots of experience. And, when you came over to Blameless, that's why I got so excited, because this is a really big problem in enterprises. But Jim, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Jim Goshi, CEO of Blameless. Sort of I like to say a software developer by trade. Spent a lot of my career just building software and love to build things. Got really interested in incident response and site reliability engineering when I was at New Relic, and we sort of built our own system there, and I really appreciated how it helped us, and so I was really intrigued to see Blameless and joined just over a year ago. And really believe in the power of having tooling support something as critical as your reliability strategy, and how that can make an engineering organization just more effective.
Yeah, and I think about it in prior roles when we worked together. We've launched AI before, but this generative AI is really, I think, opens up a lot of different opportunities than as we used to just think about AI and what it can do for companies and people. Now we've got I think the chat should be open. If not, we'll open it shortly. So as we go through, just go ahead and put any questions in there. We'll do a Q&A at the end. We'll also share how we approach kind of readying our organization for generative AI, how we launched the first product just a few days ago. And you can maybe take that and how you might be able to apply that to your organization. So Jim, I think the first thing a lot of people think about is, there's, they've got their employees, everybody's hearing generative AI, and it's like, hey, let's put open AI everywhere, in an enterprise or in their software. I think is it more hype or is it reality?
I think it's not hype. It's funny because if you heard about machine learning, well, that used to be very hyped. And honestly, it was mathematical functions that were looking for correlations and things like that. But I think what's really interesting about this new generation is it's very practical. You and I have been using it, and it works, right? I mean, you can test right away. You can ask it a question. You can on a number of different areas, you can get a response, and you can go double check it. And the quality of what I know you and I, because we look at these together, the quality of what we see is actually quite high. And this feels like it's the first time that we've ever had a technology and a tool like this of this high of quality that can really assist in many different areas.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And obviously, I'm a huge fan in many different ways. Everybody jokes that it's generative AI, but I love looking at it because, again, it's not that it takes away fresh ideas. You still really have to give it fresh ideas, but it speeds along the way you can convert it, make it more accessible to other people, change the language for a different audience. It really opens up a lot of different things. But Jim, let's dig into some of the specifics that we promised we would go through. First, let's go into software development, and I think one of the questions that I'm hearing from a lot of people is, can generative AI really create secure and reliable code? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a number of different things that I really like about it. One is, let's say you're starting to work with a new technology or a new API set or a new library or SDK or something. This is always a time when you're just trying to get up and going with something new. Asking something like Bard, which is, tends to be a little bit better with programming. Hey, write me some code that, sort of gets me started calling this API, blah, blah, blah. And it's actually really, really good at that. And the code it produces is pretty well thought out. and it's pretty thorough. So that's sort of one use case. The other is like, hey, there's this weird issue I'm having. Has anybody found a workaround for it? We saw an example of that the other day. And again, you're looking at the code and, is it like completely copy or paste, or is it more, illustrative of a technique or a style? Like you have to look at it. But the quality of it does appear to be, pretty high. So, what it doesn't know is how to put the code into your environment yet. And I know you and I are going to talk a little bit about what's interesting probably down the road with that. But it is able to generate what I would describe as like pretty clean and bug-free advice when you ask it to do some coding for you.
Yeah, and Jim, I just throw this out to any engineering leaders that are, watching this. Definitely have your engineers check it out, because you think about, historically we would go through Stack Overflow, look for this problem, see who upvoted it. It's amazing with Bard in particular, where you can go and say like, hey, I've got this 3-second, thing with this particular thing. Give me source code to be able to do it with this particular API, and something comes out. So I definitely agree. Like getting you started in those problems where you might have spent a ton of time researching. I think there's a lot of help there. But I also think, one of the things I think is going to be important, even, is if you think about it, you'd have to train it on your code. And so you got to make sure the code's right. And I think, obviously Google's got some probably pretty good source code to train it on. But, I think security and that review test, before you would put that code is going to be important, because I think people, one of the things that's, I think, dangerous right now is a lot of developers out there, like, when you and I started developing, we were probably writing, just to date myself, I remember writing to the POP3 protocol, right? But a lot of people are used to really using different types of libraries. And so if you're copying and pasting stuff from Bard or something, you've got to have better testing in your enterprise. So I think that's going to be increasingly important, to make sure there's good testing so that you don't get the wrong things in your platform.
Yeah, I think your observation is correct, which is no matter what you get has to still be reviewed, by your internal team employees. If it's a sensitive part of your system, there may be other outside people like in a security team that would take a look at it. But the bottom line is like it can get you up and going much more quickly than you trying to do things by yourself. So it's not a replacement for programmers. It's an assistant. It's an accelerator.
Yeah, and that's a good. One of the other questions we got is, how can developers ensure AI generated code adheres to company coding standards? How does that impact code reviews? I've got a couple of thoughts. I think obviously you can train it, but I think that human oversight is going to still be, like I think you're just mentioning, James, is going to be absolutely critical. You're going to be able to go faster, but human oversight's a critical component of that.
No, it absolutely is. Now, what's also interesting is the flip side of it, which is not where you get code from the tool and you're just trying to make sure you think it's okay, but it's the reverse direction, which is, hey, take a look at this code I wrote and, point out anything that you see, right? And that's essentially like what a code review is going to be. But, you can imagine the power of sharing your code with it and asking it for feedback, right? And there's some really interesting blog posts out there that we've read that talks about people that have used it in that way. And again, it doesn't know everything about your environment. But Ken, this brings up an interesting angle on software, which is right now, most people are just treating it as a separate, browser tab that they have open. And, a lot of people are logging in with their own personal credentials because it doesn't really it doesn't take company emails right now and stuff. So it's clearly in the experimental phase. But you and I were, talking the other day about a future where AI is bolted directly into a developer's environment, whether they use an IDE, for example, or just has access to their local source files or access to Git. And just, and especially with an IDE, I think what's interesting, because IDEs already offer a lot of assistance to programmers, and, they can give you advice and autocomplete, and they can check things for you. But imagine if you actually had like, generative AI running inside of your IDE. And it's also able to do a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about. Now I think that really starts to get very, very interesting. And I'm sure that day is going to come, and people have some security questions or maybe they're uncertain, but that is absolutely going to happen.
Yeah, I get the most, I think, exciting part for anybody that builds software is when generative AI can make sure that bad SQL queries don't happen. So I think that's the bane of like so many outages across the internet.
Yeah. Well, SQL is really easy to write, but it's also easy to get yourself into trouble with.
Yes.
But like a lot of things too. And, I was reading this blog post that people were using generative AI to basically do some like performance analysis, like, hey, how is this code going to perform in production? And, the algorithms were able to give some feedback on like, n squared algorithms and loops that could be, sort of problematic at high volume. So, there is this angle to it where not just like bugs, but potentially, slow performance, unoptimal performance. I mean, imagine, you could point it at your infrastructure and say, hey, like, give me some advice, and then we'll talk about that a little bit further on here. But, there's a lot that it can do given the knowledge of your environment, your code, your application, and what it can advise you on.
I know there's been a lot of back and forth on Reddit and other places, around this. How does generative AI impact the role of software developers? Is it kind of like the cloud revolution?
Well, I joke that we're still going to need people because who else is going to sit in meetings? Although you're a big enough fan of AI, Ken, that maybe this is the AI Ken I'm talking to right now. I don't know. I mean, look, it's gonna, I think you've seen this before with other aspects of technology, but technology is always moving forward. It's always improving. And there's always this question like, does it replace people or how does it change my job? And I think with software developers, it really allows you to be more productive and it allows you to produce higher quality code as a result. I don't really see it obviating the need for software developers. But an individual developer is going to be able to do more with less. But this is also what the cloud revolution brought. So I know you've got some thoughts on how the cloud revolution in a way is similar.
Well, I always think about stories sometimes. I remember when I was at Cox, I brought Andy Jassy in and we put together a huge, all business unit migration to the cloud. I think it was might have been a couple $100 million. But when we started that, you made a lot of people nervous, especially people that were traditionally sysadmins or quote operations. And so I'd fly around to some of the different business units and talk about this transformation. And what's great is Cox wanted to invest and give people the skills for this next generation. And one of the things I would do is I just walk around and I'd say, hey, listen, we are going to the cloud. And let's just, if you made a list of all the things that you did today, tomorrow, last week, and you put them in high value or low value work for you personally as a human, are you personally as a value to this company? Which of the high value things are going away? And it was funny when I would just say it like that, and they would think about it, is really that's what it does. It takes all of that stuff away. I think about like when we've had some like hard problem we're trying to solve and we're like searching on Stack Overflow and trying to search all over Google and trying to find it. Well, now I could just say, hey, I'm writing a Slack, bot and it has a 3-second timeout. How can I do that? Give me some sample source code. And there it is right there. So again, I think that low value work, and again, creating less outages in time. But that's the part I would think is that to me, it's that low value work that goes away. All right, let's move on to a different one, software maintenance, because that's a lot of people spend a lot of time with that too. How can generative AI predict and prevent software maintenance issues? I think that's a question a lot of people would like. I know I was talking to, somebody that's interested in Blameless, and they were saying, hey, we'd love for Blameless to be able to tell us, what we should be paying attention to. But thoughts on like that, predict and prevent software maintenance issues?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I think it falls into the category, like you said, of like kind of like lower value work. And, maintenance is going to mean different things in different situations. But, if you have like a very large, if you work at a bigger company and there's like a large sprawling code base and it's like, there's like all the old code and whatever, it's like, like teams generally want to focus on the new code. They want to focus on building things and some of the code that's more in maintenance mode. It's like it's not going to get that attention. So I think this is a really interesting area where AI could potentially assist you and really help you make some decisions. Like, do I need to do anything with this code? And if I do, can you just go do it? Right. And you can imagine the conversations that you might have just around software maintenance. And just imagine if you had those with an AI engine and not only could it give you some advice, but because in this area, I think it actually could, better suited to take action. It's like, hey, you've got this code base, and let's just, say in particular, like, software patches or library updates or things like that, or, something's on an old version, it's got to be updated. It's like, hey, you could go update. Could you go update? Can you also run the regression test? And if everything passes, can you push that to production? Like, yeah, I mean, a human could go through those steps, but those are really steps that anybody could follow. Like that's essentially a run book. And I do think those are going to be really well suited for AI to have more control and to take more action. Versus a build some code for me that does something like, okay, here's some sample code. How does that fit into my overarching system? People still need to kind of make that connection. This is my opinion, but I'm curious how you feel about it.
No, I think I totally agree with you. And, I think right now, if you think about all the tools out there that really touch the source data, because increasingly, I think when you think about how do I leverage, and we're going to talk more about this generative AI in my business or for my customers, you have to analyze like, what is the data you have? So when I think about it, I think about GitHub, GitLab, like, Jira. I'm sure I can only imagine what kind of work is going on right now around AI generative. And there's, of course, going to be probably new upstarts that just focus on that from the beginning, where there might be new tool sets. All right. Can generative AI automatically fix bugs and vulnerabilities in software? I think all developers like that, because we've all had that when we're like, we spent like 7 hours figuring out some bug, and it was like, it's almost always something really simple.
Yeah. Well, back when I was coding, I used to use an IDE, and I was a big fan of Eclipse, the Eclipse IDE when I was programming in Java. And, like what I liked about that IDE is you could sort of have it do big sweeping changes. Like I want to refactor and move stuff around, and it would automatically go through. And, I think, again, once AI is integrated in, you could easily imagine pushing a button and saying like, hey, just take a look at my source code and look for any obvious bugs, right? Or security vulnerabilities. Maybe check to see if any of the libraries or packages that I use have security updates that need to happen. And, I think it's going to be a lot of like, pushing buttons and then reviewing what the engine is doing. And my guess is it's going to be 90% accurate. Like I think it'll be able to fix and catch a lot of things, right? Even just simple things like, hey, I can see that you're not handling this error situation properly. So if it happens, your application is going to crash with an uncaught exception. Like that's a pretty easy one that anybody reviewing the code could pick up. And so there's no reason why, generative AI couldn't catch that. And then maybe, put in a little, catch clause, but, you would still need to fill in probably what has to happen in that case. Like, I don't know if it can infer, what the action would be in the case of that error. But, I think it absolutely could do it. And there's always like, there's like classifications and categories of bugs. There's like, the classic buffer overrun bug in C. And so it's like once it's trained of like, what does this thing look like, how to spot it, it could spot it in your code. And all the, sort of different variants, again, uncaught exceptions, category of bugs. If you're still programming in like C, like referencing like a null pointer category of a bug. And, so I think honestly, it's going to be able to do a great job here. And, you can see people posting already on the internet about how they're using it for some of these things. And I think, again, once it's integrated in with the IDEs, that's going to be transformational.
Okay, so like it's going to be easy. You still, as a human, review the changes. Because what I think about CI/CD pipelines. Think about the velocity of software, because then we could go like, say something broke a unit test, it could go and analyze it and say, hey, is this the right fix? So, I think we used to talk sometimes about the velocity imperative for, all companies. If you're, if anywhere near software, the internet
Yeah.
drives efficiency, relentlessly. I think this is going to really speed up, development cycles, because these are things that were really low value work that, the computer can give us, 90% of the answer. So it's going to be really interesting. I think it's just let developers do what I think we really love, which is building great software that delight customers.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, on that point, you'll probably have been in a situation in your career, but sometimes you think a bug's going to be really easy to fix, and it takes like 2 to 3 hours when you're done with it, and it's just because you missed something or you were debugging something that was unfamiliar to you. Well, imagine if you had AI assistant, and it's like riding along with you as you're fixing bugs, even, and being like, "Hey, what do you think here?" It's like, I'd probably do this way. You're like, "Oh, okay, thanks." Almost like pairing up, right? Instead of pairing up with another person, you're pairing up with AI to work through problems together. I think that's kind of a cool concept.
It's funny that you said that. Earlier today, I was working on some ad copy for some things we were doing, and with someone, and we went and took our ideas and then just ran it by Chat GPT, and it had some great ideas. And she said, "Hey, it's like we have a third person in the room. It's a different perspective." All right. How can generative AI help in managing technical debt? Because this is a big problem for us all, right? There's always technical debt, which I always look at technical debt isn't a technology problem, it's a business problem.
Yeah, I mean, you make trade-off decisions, sometimes unknowingly, but and then you wind up having an area of the code base that's problematic. But then what's difficult later is to really figure out what you should fix and what is okay keeping. And especially if you're in a leadership position and you're really like giving the team guidance, because a lot of times the team left to their own devices would just prefer to fix the things because they annoy them. But, as a leader, you're always thinking, okay, how much time do I want my team fixing something that was not designed properly or written poorly in the past versus just leaving it as is and, kind of moving forward. So what I think is quite interesting here is just using AI to, give both leadership and engineers a little bit of guidance here on how to think about it. And you mentioned like hooking into Jira perhaps, and other signals that you could get, monitoring signals, for example, scanning log files. And just like, like if you triangulated, you could identify the hotspots that are continuing to cause you problems and say like, this thing over here just looks like it's always a problem. So let the team go ahead and fix it. This other thing over here, maybe the team would love to fix it, but there's just no evidence that is continuing to cause ongoing issues. So maybe in that case, not. So by ingesting a lot of data, I think it can actually advise you on technical debt. And that is often the hard questions. Like, where do I invest my time and energy? Technical debt versus new stuff.
Yeah. I know, like I always do everything I think about in the lens of a business problem, but I think technical debt, because a lot of times, it's weird for me. I'm a business guy, but also a technical person. So like sometimes it's really annoying. You want to fix that part of the code. Yeah. But in the same sense, if it's not a business problem, is that really the right investment at this time? I would almost bet within 12 months, somebody's going to do it because the data is already there. It's pretty simple. Is when you touch parts of your code base, going back to hotspots, the development velocity is going to be slower. And so it's going to be great for engineers and engineering managers to have data to show, hey, listen, this is a hotspot. Every time we test it, our velocity versus other parts of the code is this. It makes total sense to make that investment because our developers will go faster. I remember one time I used to call it a leaky bucket with some engineering teams, as I would say, like, what are the things that just waste a lot of your time each sprint? And a lot of times they felt they had no voice. But I would say, if you look at it like a business, one team I remember had a meeting, they said, we spend 20% of our time doing this particular thing. And I was like, okay, well, how long would it take to fix that? They're like, oh, like 3 weeks. We'll fix it, because you think about the ROI from that, it's a no-brainer to fix that particular part of the code. So it's going to be great to have data for people to make those decisions. All right, let's hit on software testing, but then really dive into operations. We've got a couple more questions there. Generative AI contribute to automated testing. I think, that I think it's certainly going to help. Any thoughts there, Jim?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone's doing this yet, but I think in theory, you could train models on your particular software, your application, and you could have it hook up, for example, to a headless browser if your website. And I almost think like this is a really fascinating area. QA and testing, it's it's often not fully invested in by companies, and a lot of times you're just relying on your ability to be agile and respond quickly to customer reported issues. But I think this is a really interesting variant of the assistant. AI is an assistant. Can it really assist you in testing the code that you write? So with headless browsers and automated testing, you think about scripts, right? And you think about scripting a test. Well, imagine if it wasn't scripted, but it was simply AI having enough knowledge and information to understand what's going on and how to poke at things and how to probe and how to, right, sort of test different variations. I think this is actually quite interesting. And I know that every software developer would love it if they could test less personally and develop more and have something that was able to test what they're building.
Yeah, or wouldn't it be great if it could help you build the unit tests on the fly, right? Who loves building unit tests? I don't think anybody. All right, one more on testing. Can generative AI predict software performance under various conditions? And I'll just from my perspective, this one's going to be interesting because I think that's probably a hard problem. There's so many variables. I wonder if that one's going to take a little bit longer to solve. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of variables. Now, like basic resource analysis will get you somewhere. So if you understood all the different resources in your site and you could study how they behave under certain load characteristics, and if you knew a little bit about it, like, this is a scaling resource, so it looks like it's really highly utilized, but it just scales up automatically, that gets you started. But then I think if AI is able to sort of read even deeper and maybe even, generate some load testing on its own, again, through headless browser or other sources, and really, it could, I think, help you assess basically what's going to happen under load. And this is a big question for websites. I have 100 customers today, but I'm going to launch a big marketing campaign. What's going to happen if I get 10,000 customers hitting my website? These are like questions you and I have literally heard throughout our career. And a lot of times the engineering team, the only way they'll really know is if they run that exact simulated test. And even then, sometimes they test it, but the reality of what they tested is not the reality of what happens on the internet, and stuff still breaks. The most extreme being, Super Bowl tests. Like, am I going to survive a Super Bowl ad? These are all really interesting questions. And I do think generative AI, in a similar fashion to finding bugs and other things, I think it has a role to play here. It's a little more advanced, like you said. It's not as straightforward, but it's just ingesting a lot of data and having a lot of knowledge about the things that it has data about. Like, I know this is a database. I can actually query the underlying CPU. I can check with, the cloud, what's it powered behind. I can infer, extra load. I can look at the queries going through it under, normal load and like extrapolate those under high load. Like, you can probably just do an awful lot here. That's pretty advanced stuff, but I imagine it's coming.
Yeah, no, and by the way, that one I wish I had in prior life, so won't spend too much time on it, won't mention where, but I remember one time getting a call on a Thursday, and I wasn't familiar with this particular as a big client, and I get a call from another person on the team, let's say it like that, and they're like, "Oh, we're having a little challenge." I'm like, "Well, what's the challenge?" "We're trying to do 1 million simultaneous connections," and I'm like, "Okay, when are you making this test?" It was like Thursday, and it was Saturday. I'm like, "Oh, okay, this will be fun." But anyways, so if I could just click a button and say, "Yep, it'll be fine." All right. let's dig into operations, make a little bit closer to some of the things that we do here at Blameless. How can generative AI ensure compliance with regulatory standards in operations? And this one, I've done 2 FedRAMPs, and of course SOC 2 Type 2.
Yeah.
This is something where when you have a business, you have to be compliant. Whatever
Yeah.
strict criteria. There's often a big tax, I think, on your engineering team around that compliance. So I think this is a pretty interesting part that I think both the CISOs and the security team and the engineers would both like to get automated a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even we use one of the tools that helps us with our SOC 2 compliance efforts. And, we still have to do a lot of things behind the scenes, like you say. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. If nothing else, like even using AI to help you understand what these regulations mean, when they change, what do I need to do? Give me examples of how companies audit themselves. Give me examples of how I do this. And then a lot of what happens in an audit is go fetch information, capture it, and archive it as evidence, right? So people are running around, again, doing very low difficulty work, right? So it's more toil. And, could you not have like AI assistants helping you with this part of it, really helping you audit, stay compliant, and also answer questions. I do think this will help everybody up their game in this area.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be great. And I think, cybersecurity is going to continue to be a huge threat. I think so compliance and, making sure that you're building safe software, continue to deploy it, I think is going to be critical to, buyers of SaaS software and, builders of SaaS software. All right. How does generative AI optimize software operations and monitoring?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of toil in software operations. I think, again, this is where AI can be really used to assist. I mean, I'm curious, like you spent a lot of your years in operations, and I'd love to hear what are your thoughts on where you think it can help out?
Well, and this one is, I think I might just save it because we're going to talk about like what we've done at Blameless, because it's one of the things I got there is there's just incredible inefficiencies in software operations, in particular in some areas, which, it's kind of on the next questions around incidents. So I'm going to hold my thoughts just a little bit to the question after this, and we'll share some of the things that we're doing specifically around this. The last one on the questions: can generative AI automate incident response in software operations? And this is where I'll just jump in and give a perspective. I've been on, outages and different roles. I remember one time I was on a call where we had like 20 people from Oracle and Oracle financials, and it was just a massive call. And even in our provider that we had, with Oracle, they had like somebody that did firewall and somebody did this and somebody did that, and they weren't communicating. I think, then it was updating the executives, telling the customer success team, telling the sales team what's going on. The engineers are getting interrupted because somebody's saying, I need to do an update because it was a very critical incident. There's just an incredible amount of inefficiency that happens when you have software incidents. After them, if you do things right, communicating with them at the time, and then making sure they don't have, there's just a tremendous amount of toil that I think a lot of companies really don't think about. And I think there's going to be a lot that can be done here.
No, there absolutely is. That, like you said, there's so much chaos that happens when there's an incident, and there's so many dimensions to it. So, the basics of running an incident at the company level often involves, customer is affected. So a support team is notified, then the engineering team is called in to look at it. Perhaps if it's a big situation, executives are alerted. Now you've got a sales team trying to close business while you're having an incident, an outage, and sometimes trials are affected by the same thing. And now the sales team is like, hey, we're trying to close business, and the people trialing our product can't make it work. And so you have this like big thing that happens at the company level, and really that's a lot about timely and good communication flow. internally and externally, right? And then, of course, you have all the different things happening within the engineering team, and how quickly are they able to come together, understand the problem, get on the same page, put a fix out there, make sure everything is fixed. So a lot of coordination, a lot of communications, and a lot of information to sort through, right? And under very stressful conditions at the same time. So it's not just you have a site outage, it's that perhaps you were woken up at 2 a.m., you're really disoriented, your adrenaline levels go sky high because now you realize there's a major site issue, executives are piling on with that, which again exacerbates your stress level. And now you're supposed to try to be able to like think and work through things. What a perfect use case, right, for AI in many, many, many different dimensions of this. I think this is a really great use of it. It's a really interesting use of it.
Yeah, and the next one, I think Jim and I thought it might be helpful to just talk you through how we're thinking about generative AI ourselves, because I think you might have a different application if you're building SaaS software or want to use SaaS software or whatever it may be. But I think like, how do you think about it? And before we go into it, I just share a little bit. Like I think as we think about the problem space, so like a lot of people when they think about it, they call it incident management. But it's really much more than incident management. It's really enterprise reliability. Because if you think about it, you have an incident, so something breaks. You want to build you want to have the best tools so your engineers can quickly, connect. So maybe they're on Slack or they're on Teams, and they want to connect to all the tools that you have. You've got to capture that metadata of like what happened because you're going to build a timeline, post it. And then you got to communicate, right? You have to update the entire team. And a lot of times, like the engineers are in the know, but they have to reword it in a way so that it's digestible by the sales team or customer success. But you have to communicate to the people to get your whole enterprise understanding what's going on. Then post that, you've got the retrospective, like how do we do a do not repeat plan? How do we get together, look at the timeline of events, figure out what happened, figure out how we can not do that. Then you got to capture that data as action items for people. And then you have to visualize it and regularly report so everybody knows that those things that we said, we've got a continuous improvement. And I think that's where you drive enterprise reliability. So I know that's how you and I kind of think about the problem space. Maybe I thought that might be helpful. Anything I missed just on framing, the space we're in, and then let's dig into the AI part.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good framing of it.
All right. And so when we started thinking, okay, with this new technology, how can we save our customers time and money? What's data do we have unique? And this is the thing I think everybody should consider is what's the data that's uniquely in your platform that you could use with, say, generative AI to drive efficiencies or some sort of business improvement. And I think that's where the first thing we thought about is like, where are the areas where we have some amazing data? Because, because it's enterprise reliability, we have a lot more data than just incident. We've got this broad set of data, which we can use that to help our customers more. And I think that's what really, we went to the first thing that we thought was super painful, which, was just communications. But am I thinking anything else you add on just the framework that you think companies should be thinking about when they're?
No, look, I think, the beauty of even the way AI is set up today, you can have a window open in your browser. You, in theory, can be using it throughout, right? You can be asking, Bard or whatever questions. You can having Chat GPT rewrite things. Like, you can sort of use it as a ride along. But I think what starts to get more interesting is when tools, internal tools, external tools, build it in and just make it like seamless, right? So, I guess back to my, future state where AI is built into the IDEs, not just like a separate window to the side. Imagine the power it's going to have, right? So when AI is built into the tools that you use, and they're automatic and they just very, very low friction to use them, the power of those tools increases exponentially.
Yeah, and this might be a good time to come up with the first thing that we thought about, which again is that communication piece. Because if you're an executive, you're rewriting it for your boss, right? Or their boss's boss. If it's engineers, many companies actually hire people to listen on calls just to help rewrite things in real time. And a lot of times, this has probably happened to anybody that's been an engineering manager. It's terrible, when somebody else from a different part of the org, customer success, calls you and tells you that you have an outage. Maybe you've got alerts, a paging, something didn't quite go right. And so we thought, wouldn't it be great if companies could create a Teams channel, a Slack channel for executives, customer success, and sales, and the engineer could write their normal update, but then with that same core data, automatically use a generative AI to rewrite it so everybody else can see it. And that's something that I know I'm excited about, Jim. We announced it. We actually have customers testing it right now. It'll be in general release on October 23rd. But that's something that we think just that alone will save hundreds of hours for enterprises. But anything you want to add to that? Because I think we're both pretty excited.
Yeah.
And this is just the beginning.
Well, one of the most powerful aspects of generative, like these models, is their ability to clearly communicate things. And this is also one of the biggest pain points most engineers have with communicating to non-technical people. Or maybe you flip it, and if you're non-technical, you're like, I never quite understand what the engineering team is telling me. And so what a brilliant place to start for us, because you're in the heat of the moment. You're trying to basically solve a problem. Someone needs to give an update, and it's who do you update, or what are we talking about? Are we updating internal stakeholders? Are we updating external stakeholders? Are they technical? Are they non-technical? Like, how do we do it? And what's really interesting too is, so when we were experimenting with this, we came up with some typical things that maybe a status update, discovering that a queue was backed up and we had to flush it and blah, 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 blah. And we're like, hey, give an update, but as if you were talking to the sales team. And, what's really interesting is that it adds, that sort of like sprinkle of like nicety around the edges that really makes it more digestible by a sales team. So, things like, rest assured, we're still working on it. We're going to get it resolved. And, that's exactly what a sales team wants to hear versus a very dry, technical, bland thing that the sales team's sitting there wondering, well, I don't know, like, are they going to fix this thing or what's happening? And so again, this is a really big area of pain for most companies. It's never really addressed. I mean, frankly, it's an unaddressed pain problem. And, this is a great place for us to start. One of many things that we're going to release to basically help with communications, which again, it's a huge area that could stand to use improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many things to come. So when we're thinking about, companies preparing, anything else that we think, like somebody else is thinking, hey, generative AI is great, I want to go do something with it. Is there anything else they should be thinking? Again, from my perspective, I think the framework is, what data do you have? What are the biggest pain points of your customers? And where is it that data, in many cases, we'll call it reworked, in a different way, in a different format? Because communication is the key to so many things. How can you use that to benefit your customers and really drive and solve their business problems?
I mean, you can prepare today by, using the experimental versions of these things that are out there in the public, and they're free. And, it's a little bit uncomfortable because, many of them, you got to put your personal email address in to get access and do that. But, this is what it looks like to be on the cutting edge and trying these things out. I know a lot of companies are also just preparing by making sure, their security departments have a point of view on AI, maybe, other just policies within the company. So this is the time to basically get your policies in order and understand how you're going to use AI, how you're going to think about it, because it's coming and it's already here in many cases. It really, the companies that embrace it early are going to get a huge boost from it, a huge advantage.
No, absolutely. So I want to make sure if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in. I guess we got the Q&A open too. And let's hit a couple of those, Jim. Scott Townsend, I wonder if it's a Scott that I'm thinking it is. You mentioned security being a possible area of concern with generative AI engineers. Engineers may be incentivized to use tools like ChatGPT to help generate code, which could raise concerns around sharing proprietary or otherwise sensitive data. Thoughts on how to handle this challenge? First of all, Scott, that's a good question. I've got a couple of thoughts. Jim, do you want to take it first? Do you want me to take a shot at it?
Yeah, why don't you take a shot at this one?
So I think you're saying is like, hey, we're worried about that they're going to take code and proprietary data. Well, I think that's where you may have to pay attention to, is it a company version of generative AI? In other words, like we're taking proprietary company code and posting it in a open AI that's not company controlled. How do you want to handle that? Or are you training the model on your proprietary code? I think that's important. What I believe is, many companies will say, if I want to use a service, I want to bring my own AI service, so that eliminates that. It's all going and training within the company's generative AI box. I think that's probably what you're going to see. And with that, if you think about the APIs from Bard, ChatGPT, or others, it's pretty easy for a SaaS provider to allow customers to have multiple choices. So I think it's going to be kind of bring your own. And then I think, in time, I think the security teams will probably have to think about some governance around that.
Yeah, and I think it's something they're going to do anyways. Developers love to find tools that help them, and are often maybe flying a little bit under the radar or breaking the rules to a degree. So getting out and ahead of it, having a policy, having a strong point of view is a way forward. So, for example, you may have a policy that says, "Hey, I'm fine to have the engines write code for me. I'm going to then take that and customize it because they don't know anything about my environment." So there's really no security risk there, assuming I look at the code and it all looks good. But maybe there's a policy of like, don't dump your source code into one of these public engines and ask it to fix bugs, because that is then information flowing out to a third party. So I think getting on top of it, having the discussion with key stakeholders internally, and just saying like, here's a situation, what's our point of view on it? Here's another situation. But I do think you have to realize if you don't have anything, engineers are going to go and do stuff. Like, that's just the nature of an engineer.
Yeah, and I think that goes straight back to cloud engineering. I remember I had different business units in a prior life, and I would find that and I had one role where we did parts of compliance, and where engineering just got access to the cloud and wrote stuff, and databases could get exposed. And so you have to be really careful. And I think you'll see those kind of structures, and just like it happened with cloud, will come into place, and everybody will find the right way to utilize it for your company. So good question. Jim, I think we'll probably then, I don't see any others, we'll probably wrap it up. I just want to offer, Aaron, if you could put the demo link in there. If anybody would like a demo of what we're doing with AI Comms, we've got a lot of great coverage in the press with the AI Comms Assistant. If you would like a demo of it, happy to do it. And I'll just say too, is if you're interested, you can actually just ask, if you reach out to us, to have Jim or I join the call. If there's something we could do, we don't, no sales stuff, share with you like our own experience of thinking about generative AI. We're happy to do that. Jim, anything you want to close us with?
Yeah. Well, I'm excited because the AI revolution is here, and this, maybe this is like the $1 bill you put on your wall, Ken, of like, now we have something in our own product, and it's really exciting. It's just the beginning. It's going to be the beginning for many people, and some are already there. So it's just a great time. This is a really interesting technology. It's gonna be transformational.
Yeah, and Jim, to that, I think this is going to be bigger than the cloud. I think this is going to be as big as the web. And I think people don't get the implications. And again, anything that we're doing that requires communications that's inefficient, this is going to drive that efficiency. So just like the internet's drove efficiency, is we're humans. We have to talk to a way, we have to communicate in a way that we understand each other, and that's engaging. This is the beginning of automating, and ultimately it should help us all communicate better. That'd be my hope. Certainly need that.
We do.
All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap up. Look forward to the next webinar. We have some special guests coming up. So thanks, Jim, and everybody have a wonderful day and weekend.
All right. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everybody.